On Friday, we had this so-called trade truce between U.S. and China. U.S. has confirmed a trade deal, China has confirmed it. But what are the details? Do we exactly know what's in the details?
Yeah, there's plenty of room for the China-U.S. deal to go pear-shaped.
President Trump stood in front of cameras and called it a win. Just days ago, the White House confirmed what it called a framework agreement with China signed in Geneva, then reaffirmed in London. Markets surged. The S&P 500 hit a new high. Trump celebrated the moment as a triumph in his 90 deals in 90 days campaign. But while the headline screamed victory, the fine print was nowhere to be found. No official document, no detailed terms, no timeline for enforcement, and beneath the surface, the question was already forming. Is this a lasting peace or just a 90-day pause before the next trade war begins?
On June 13th, Beijing signaled a willingness to ease its restrictions. That'll buy some time, but insiders say it's a patch. The export licenses the Chinese government is issuing expire in 6 months.
On paper, the deal delivers real concessions. China has agreed to restart limited exports of rare earth elements critical minerals used in everything from smartphones and satellites to electric vehicles and military jets. These exports had been nearly frozen since April 2024, causing a 40% price spike within 3 weeks. Ford and several automakers were forced to shut down production lines. The supply shock was global. Now, with new 6-month export licenses issued by Beijing, some relief is on the way, especially for U.S. auto firms in Detroit. In return, the U.S. agreed to reduce key tariffs, cutting rates from 55% down to 10% on certain Chinese goods. The administration also loosened visa restrictions for Chinese students seen as a goodwill gesture. There's also movement on fentanyl. China has signaled it will take concrete steps to ban key precursor chemicals, addressing a major priority for the U.S. But here's the catch. None of these measures are permanent. The rare earth licenses expire in 6 months. The tariffs are only suspended, and the promises on fentanyl remain verbal. This isn't a deal, it's a truce and an unstable one.
They said China firmly opposes any country reaching trade agreements with the U.S. that would sacrifice China's interests in exchange for tariff relief, and then promised those unspecified countermeasures.
While Washington praised the deal, Beijing added its own terms. 2 days after the Geneva announcement, China's Ministry of Commerce released a sharp statement. It firmly opposes any trade agreements that sacrifice China's interests in exchange for tariff relief. The warning wasn't subtle, and it wasn't just for the U.S. Beijing made clear it would retaliate against any country signing bilateral deals with Washington that undercut its position. Behind the scenes, China is already delaying rare earth export approvals. Thousands of license applications are stuck in the system. Industry insiders say the flow of critical materials may take months to normalize if it happens at all. At the same time, China is holding back on fentanyl enforcement. Analysts at Bloomberg and the China Show report that Beijing is keeping that card in reserve ready to use only if it sees real movement from Washington. It's a chess game, and Trump may have moved first, but China has more than a few pieces left on the board. This was supposed to be Trump's breakthrough moment proof that his tariff strategy worked. And, in some ways, it did. The US got access to rare earths, a possible breakthrough on fentanyl, and a chance to avoid economic disruption. But every part of this deal is temporary, conditional, unwritten. China hasn't forgotten the last time a deal broke down, and this time, it's acting more cautiously, using timing and bureaucracy to test Trump's patience. Meanwhile, back in Washington, voices inside the administration are already split. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent wants to keep the 10% tariffs in place. Trump says he can bring back 25% tariffs anytime. That uncertainty alone could rattle markets again. So yes, Trump got the headline he wanted. But what comes next will depend not on what he signed, but on what both sides actually deliver. Because this wasn't the art of the deal. It was the art of the truce, and that's a very different game.
On that, which is that this afternoon, obviously there are a few hours ahead of us, the Chinese Ministry of Commerce has put out a statement confirming that a framework agreement has been reached. And in this statement, they go on to say that some of the restrictive measures imposed by the United States are going to be lifted now.
Donald Trump announced that the United States had signed a trade deal with China. On the surface, it sounded like a breakthrough. But this time, something was different. China responded. the Chinese government officially confirmed a trade framework had been reached. But while Washington celebrated, Beijing remained measured, cautious, and calculated. The contrast between both sides said more than the deal itself, and it raised an important question: who truly shaped this agreement?
We hope the US will work with China to implement the important consensus reached during a phone call between the two heads of state.
Both the Chinese Foreign Ministry and the China's Ministry of Commerce stressed that China expects the US to meet it halfway, leverage the China-US economic and trade consultation mechanism more effectively.
From Beijing, the announcement came with none of the theatrics. The Ministry of Commerce issued a brief statement acknowledging the deal. The language focused on dialogue, mutual understanding, and stability. No mention of victory, no images of handshakes, no press conference. Chinese officials emphasized continuity, not change. They described the framework as a result of steady consultations and positioned it as a step toward global economic stability. There was no reference to Donald Trump, no personal credit given. Just a neutral, almost clinical confirmation of the facts.
So this is not exactly a new trade deal. This was formalizing talks that already happened in mid-June.
Behind the headlines, the agreement itself was not new. It finalized terms that had already been negotiated in mid-June. At the core of the deal was a trade-off involving tariffs and rare earth minerals. The U.S. agreed to reduce its tariff rate on Chinese imports from the previously threatened 145% down to approximately 30%. China, in return, maintained its baseline tariff of 10% on U.S. goods. Most critically, China agreed to start reviewing and processing export applications for rare earth elements, a sector it dominates, controlling over 90% of global processing. Earlier this year, as tensions escalated, China had begun tightening control over its rare earth exports, creating supply pressure on U.S. manufacturers in technology, defense, and energy. In response, Trump imposed countermeasures, including tariff hikes and export restrictions. This new framework represented a pause. China would resume limited rare earth exports under regulatory review, and the U.S. would ease some restrictions. But there was no mutual tariff rollback, only a freezing of further escalation. The stock market welcomed the announcement. On the day the framework was confirmed, the S&P 500 rose nearly 1%, and the Nasdaq approached an all-time high. For investors, the deal removed immediate uncertainty. It signaled that the risk of new tariffs or sudden retaliation had been avoided. But analysts across Bloomberg, The Times, and Reuters pointed out that critical issues remained untouched. Technology transfers, intellectual property protection, and long-term tariff strategy were all missing. The framework appeared more like a tactical pause than a durable resolution.
Has Trump really gained anything from this? It's difficult to see. He's obviously going to try and paint it as some sort of victory, but we'll have to wait till we see the details.
Trump needed the deal. With mounting pressure at home to pass his signature One Big Beautiful Bill, he required a foreign policy win to strengthen his domestic narrative. The bill, which promises up to $10,000 in annual tax cuts for middle-class families, has faced Republican pushback due to its projected cost and proposed Medicaid cuts. At the G7 summit earlier that week, Trump left early, skipping private meetings with key trade partners. His administration insists that more deals are coming, including with India and the UK, aiming for completion by Labor Day. This China framework is the first on that path, but it's far from decisive. In Washington, the framework was announced with enthusiasm. In Beijing, it was acknowledged with restraint. There was no ceremony, no coordinated messaging, no sign of celebration. The tone from China suggested a calculated move, a step to manage risk, not to concede. Trump framed it as a win. But the quiet confidence from Beijing hinted that this was a deal they had already prepared to accept. And that leaves one final question. Was this Trump's breakthrough or China's quiet containment?
All right. Ed, where are the deals?
Well, I think this is just more evidence that these deals aren't really deals at all.
This summer, all eyes are on July 9th. That's the deadline for President Trump's 90 Deals in 90 Days campaign, a bold promise to reset America's global trade ties. But as the clock runs down, two stories dominate. Canada is threatening retaliation, and China's e-commerce exports are collapsing under pressure. Trump says deals are happening, but most appear to be announcements, not agreements. With global partners still waiting, the question now is, what's really been accomplished?
Whether it's a deal with Canada or a deal with the UK or a deal with China, I mean, every time this happens, we all get very excited and then we go look at, the terms of the agreement, of which there are usually none.
When Trump launched his tariff offensive back in early April, the pitch was bold. The U.S. would pause some tariffs for 90 days while negotiating fairer, more reciprocal trade terms. One deal per day. That was the idea.
There's no deal here.
But by late June, only two framework agreements have been reached, one with the UK and one with China. Neither has been finalized. The UK deal includes tariff cuts on autos and aerospace, but it sidesteps core issues like steel. The China deal, announced in London, merely outlines temporary tariff relief in exchange for Beijing suspending its retaliatory measures. Meanwhile, other trading partners are still waiting, or walking away. The European Union continues urgent negotiations with Washington, but has yet to secure a concrete outcome. Their offer of a zero-for-zero tariff exchange remains on the table, but no commitment has been made. And then there's Canada. Despite being a top U.S. trade partner, Canada has seen no signed agreement. Since April 2nd, nearly all Canadian exports to the U.S. have faced a 25% tariff. Ottawa responded with countermeasures and a firm warning. If no deal is reached by July 9th, new tariffs on U.S. steel and aluminum will take effect on July 21st. Prime Minister Carney has made it clear. Canada won't wait forever.
When tariffs are like laying a 10% consumption tax on America.
Tariffs still on, inflation's still coming, prices are going to rise.
With so many trade talks stalled or unresolved, the economic burden is starting to show, especially at home. Consumers are already absorbing higher prices. While official inflation data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics in April and May showed moderate movement, experts like Fed Chair Jerome Powell have warned that the full impact of tariffs likely won't appear in economic reports until fall 2025. That's because it takes months for price hikes to move through the supply chain. Meanwhile, the Federal Reserve held interest rates steady in June, despite heavy pressure from the White House to cut them. Powell has made it clear the Fed won't act until it sees hard evidence of how tariffs are affecting inflation and the labor market. Some of that evidence is beginning to surface. According to data cited on Fox Business, the value of small parcel shipments from China to the U.S. fell 40% year over year. E-commerce platforms like Shein and Temu have reported double-digit sales declines. And in Canada, construction firms and manufacturers reliant on U.S. steel are reporting sharp cost increases due to retaliatory tariffs. Approval ratings are shifting too. A YouGov Economist poll in mid-June showed Trump's support on economic issues had dropped from 45% at the start of the year to just 35%. As prices climb and uncertainty grows, political pressure is mounting. Beyond price impacts, the strategy risks alienating key allies. China, while cooperating on temporary tariff cuts, is pushing back against tech restrictions. New U.S. limits on semiconductor exports have shaken markets. Analysts warn these tensions could fuel China's drive to overtake the U.S. in AI. In Canada, Prime Minister Carney has voiced frustration with Washington's unilateral approach. Ottawa views the U.S. tactics as coercive, even toward close allies. The EU, meanwhile, is holding firm, warning it may pursue action at the WTO if tariff hikes resume after July 9th.
We're reaching July 9th. The 90-day pause is coming to an end, and here we are. We have no deals.
Trump's 90 Deals in 90 Days campaign began with the promise of a new trade order. But with less than 2 weeks remaining, only uncertainty has truly materialized. The real question isn't whether more deals will be announced. It's whether any of them will actually matter. And if America's closest allies, like Canada, are still waiting for a signature, how much longer can the world wait?